5e is chock full of powerful spells, but it also has its fair share of, not so great ones. Today, we're going to try and shine shit and turn those bad spells into good ones. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese, and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before I get started on this video, I want to ask you to please like, subscribe, comment, and share. I'm loving making these videos and interacting with the comment section, so don't be afraid to tell me I'm stupid or smart or whatever. I'd love to hear from you. Now, let's talk about casters. Spellcasters in 5e get a lot of criticism for being a little overpowered compared to their martial companions. In this video, I'm going to exacerbate that problem even further by buffing some of their worst spells. In all seriousness, I love spellcasters because of the variety of gameplay they offer. But whenever I play a caster, I often find myself using the same small core of spells because they are just way better than the alternatives. So let's plunge into the depths of the Wizard spellbook and take a look at 5 of the worst spells in 5th edition, and then try to fix them. Let's start with what is, in my opinion, the worst cantrip by far, True Strike. This is the one cantrip I have never taken as a spellcaster because I just cannot find a method to make it work. Let's start by seeing what it does by the book. True Strike takes an action to cast, requires concentration, and has a range of 30 feet. The spell reads, blah blah blah, flavor text, you use an action, and on your next turn, you gain advantage on your first attack roll against the target, provided this spell hasn't ended. So essentially, you are using an action to gain advantage on one attack next turn. It doesn't sound so bad at first glance, everyone loves advantage, but you have to remember that it only has a range of 30 feet, so any long-ranged attacks are out. Not to mention, it takes an action to cast, which means you're sacrificing an attack to get advantage on the next attack, when statistically you would have much better odds just attacking twice. And it's concentration, so you can't use it while concentrating on an actually useful spell either. So you see the problem. This cantrip sucks. Now, how can we fix it? We have to remember that this is a cantrip, so we don't want to go overboard with the buffs, but here are a couple proposed solutions. The simplest solution would be to just slightly change the wording. Rather than giving advantage on only your first attack the next turn, it could give advantage on all attacks on your next action. Specifying that it only works on your action prevents things like Flurry of Blows or Action Surge from getting too much value out of the cantrip. Another solution is a bit more complicated, but dips into some unearthed arcana that Wizards of the Coast released recently. The part I'm looking at specifically is in regards to the rogue. They added a cunning action called Aim. As a bonus action, you give yourself advantage on your next attack roll on the current turn. You can use this bonus action only if you haven't moved during this turn, and after you use the bonus action, your speed is 0 until the end of your current turn. If True Strike worked like this, it would open up the user's actions for an attack, while also forcing them to spend their bonus action and sacrifice all of their movement for that turn. I think that's a pretty fair trade-off for a cantrip. Next, let's move up to some first level spells, starting off with WITCHBOlt. WITCHBOlt is one of those spells that seems powerful on the surface, but when actually put into practice, it turns into, well, trash. It uses an action, has a range of 30 feet, and requires concentration. The spell reads, flavor text, make a ranged spell attack against a creature. On a hit, the target takes 1d12 lightning damage, and on each of your turns for the duration, you can use your action to deal 1d12 lightning damage to the target automatically. The spell ends if you use your action to do anything else. The spell also ends if the target is ever outside the spell's range, or if it has total cover from you. You know, now that I'm reading it out loud, it doesn't seem that strong on the surface either. The fact that there are 3 ways to just end the spell without even losing concentration makes for a pretty horrendous use of a first level spell slot. But maybe you'd get a lot of value out of the spell by casting it at a higher level. That would be the case, if not for one little word. When cast at a higher level, the initial damage is increased by 1d12 for each slot above the second. So let's say you're casting the spell at 3rd level and compare it to another popular 3rd level spell, Fireball. Average damage for a fireball is 32 fire damage to every creature in a 20-foot radius sphere. Average damage for a 3rd level witch bolt is 21 to one target the first round. Every round after that, it's 7. So let's be generous and assume that your fireball only hit 1 target. You would have to use your action on Witchbolt for 3 rounds to do more damage than fireball. Hell, you're 5th level by the time you have 3rd level spell slots, which means a freaking firebolt is going to do more damage in 3 rounds on average without maintaining concentration and from a much longer range. Not to mention, the Witchbolt just ends if the target uses their turn to move 30 feet away from you or hide behind a wall. So yeah, this spell is a doozy. How can we make it good? Well, if we're going to keep all those spell canceling stipulations, then I think the simplest way to buff this spell is to do away with that silly initial damage at higher levels nonsense. Just make it buff the damage every round by 1d12. Still weaker than a fireball, but can realistically end up doing more single target damage. But in my opinion, those stipulations are stupid. It is way too easy for an opponent to just run out of the range or duck behind full cover and end the spell. So what I recommend is this. Remove the stipulation that opponents can just walk out of range or hide behind a wall. I get that it makes sense with the imagery of the spell, but I would rather a spell be viable than be consistent with its imagery. Forcing your caster to get within 30 feet of an opponent and then stay there is going to be a problem no matter what. So let's just ditch that. Once you get rid of that, it is a burst of initial damage and a guaranteed d12 of damage, no save or attack required every single round after that, which I think is pretty strong. It serves the purpose of being a spell which does guaranteed damage, burning down the boss with damage you know will hit without allowing them to easily break the spell. Next, we're going to move up to 2nd level spells for our first underwhelming divination spell. Let's talk about Find Traps. It requires an action and has a range of 120 feet. The spell reads, you sense the presence of any trap within range that is within line of sight. A trap, for the purpose of the spell, includes anything that would inflict a sudden or unexpected effect you consider harmful or undesirable, which was specifically intended as such by its creator. Thus, the spell would sense an area affected by the alarm spell, a glyph of warding, or a mechanical pit trap, but it would not reveal a natural weakness in the floor, an unstable ceiling, or a hidden sinkhole. This spell merely reveals that a trap is present. You don't learn the location of each trap, but you do learn the general nature of the danger posed by a trap you sense. Nice. Super helpful. Of course there's a damn trap here, why else would I cast the spell? If you're casting Find Traps, odds are you already suspect there's a trap somewhere within 120 feet of you. I don't need to expend a 2nd level spell slot just to have a DM say, yeah, there's a trap. The solution for this spell is pretty easy. Just tell us where the traps are. Keep the stipulation about it having to be in line of sight, but tell us their location too. You probably already have a person looking for traps, so if you want to be sure about it, you should be rewarded for expending spell slots. Not to mention, this is one of the few spells that really feels like a ranger spell, and ranger spells need all the help they can get. For our second underwhelming divination spell, let's go to the 6th level spell, Find the Path. And boy oh boy does this spell feel like a colossal waste of a 6th level slot. It is a minute-long cast time, requires concentration, and lasts up to 1 day. The spell reads as follows. This spell allows you to find the shortest, most direct physical route to a specific fixed location that you are familiar with on the same plane of existence. If you name a destination on another plane of existence, a destination that moves, such as a mobile fortress, or a destination that isn't specific, such as a green dragon's lair, the spell fails. For the duration, as long as you are on the same plane of existence as the destination, you know how far it is and what direction it lies. While you are traveling there, whenever you are presented with a choice of paths along the way, you automatically determine which path is the shortest and most direct route, but not necessarily the safest route, to the destination. Again, nice. Super helpful. My problem with the spell is that it operates under the assumption that your party is not going to reach its destination without its use. In all my years as a DM, I've never said the party has to find an important location and then not allowed them to reach it because they just didn't find it. Not to mention, this is a 6th level spell. It's up there with the likes of Heal, True Seeing, and Disintegrate. It should do way more than just lead the way to a destination that the party will probably find anyway. This is a harder one to fix for that reason. Without changing the entire identity of the spell, we have to make it at least a little more likely someone would choose to prepare it. I want it to still fill that finding niche, so I would make the wording a bit more broad. Let's move those parentheticals out of the definition. I think if you're spending a 6th level spell slot to look for a vague location, it should at the very least point you to the nearest one. Also, let's take out the bit that something so simple as movement can make this powerful of a spell fail. When fixing spells like this, I also tend to look over spells of the same school at previous or later later levels. Locate Object is a second level divination spell that allows the user to detect an object within 1,000 feet of them. So let's go ahead and give Find the Path the same ability, but instead of just knowing its exact location, it can lead you there, as the spell does with destinations. So now, Find the Path can not only lead you to a destination, but also an object, even if it's moving or not super specific. Obviously, you'll want to be specific so you don't end up at the wrong dragon's lair, but the option's there either way. And lastly, for Find the Path, I do think it would be nice to have an option similar to the Scrying spell to find a specific individual, using the same wisdom save rules as Scrying and everything. If they fail, you know the shortest and most direct route to that person. With all of that, I think we've got a spell I'm more comfortable with placing at 6th level. It's still niche, which is important to maintain, but it feels powerful enough to justify using in those niche situations. For our final spell, we're going to discuss the spell that probably gives the least bang for your buck out of any of the other spells in 5e at a whopping 7th level, Mordenkainen'S Sword, or as I like to call it, Bad Spiritual Weapon. If you ever take this spell, I'm worried for you. Here's why. The spell requires an action to cast, has a range of 60 feet, requires concentration, and reads as follows. You create a sword-shaped plane of force that hovers within range. It lasts for the duration. When the sword appears, you make a melee spell attack against a target of your choice within 5 feet of the sword. On a hit, the target takes 3d10 force damage. Until the spell ends, you can use a bonus action on each of your turns to move the sword up to 20 feet to a spot you can see and repeat this same attack against the same target or a different one. Look familiar? For reference, let's take a look at Spiritual Weapon, a 2nd level spell. Spiritual Weapon requires a bonus action to cast, does not require concentration, does basically the exact same thing as this spell, but instead deals 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier. Every 2 levels above 2nd, its damage increases by 1d8. So if you're casting the spell at 6th level, it does 3d8 plus probably 5 at this point. Your average damage is 20 per hit. Mordenkainen'S Sword at 7th level averages 18. Remember when I said this spell is just bad spiritual weapon? That's why. It is just flat out worse. It does less damage at a higher level, has the exact same amount of movement, and requires concentration. That's insane. So how can we make it better than Spiritual Weapon? To be fair to Mordenkainen, it is hard to be better than Spiritual Weapon. That spell is an incredibly efficient use of a spell slot. So let's try and contrast the spell a bit while also giving it a little bit more oomph. To start, I'm going to keep the requirement of concentration and the use of an action to cast the spell. If I get rid of those, it feels a bit like a Spiritual Weapon clone, and I want to avoid that as much as possible. I'm going to have a bit of fun with the spell, because for those who don't know, Mordenkainen was actually Gary Gygax's player character in his Greyhawk campaign. So we have a bit of history on the person who created the spell, and can reach back into their personality a bit to add some flair to it. To start, Mordenkainen mentored Bigby, who eventually created the spell Bigby's Hand, which can move up to 60 feet. So let's go ahead and make the sword have that same move speed. The spell also specifies that you create a sword-shaped plane of force. So when you cast this spell, you're basically physicalizing the plane of force and crafting it into a blade. That's cool. Now, most objects in the plane of force are invisible or at the very least transparent. So I think it would also be appropriate to make this sword invisible to creatures without true sight. So now you've got a sword that can fly at 60 feet per round and is invisible, giving you advantage on attacks. But the damage is still pretty lackluster. I think the simplest way to change this would be to just go ahead and make it deal 3d12 instead of 3d10. With all of those things combined, I think now we have a spell appropriate for the 7th level slot. Those are, in my opinion, 5 of the weakest spells in 5e, and I think I've patched them up enough to make them a little more viable without pushing them too far over the edge. If you think I did a great job, or a terrible job, let me know in the comments. If you want another video talking about fixing weak spells, there are plenty more I could address, so let me know. But until then, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you around.